Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principal. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on all the socials at Jethro Jones. Today, I am excited to have Seth Fleischauer on the program today. He is the president of Banyan Global Learning, which he founded in 2008 after teaching elementary school via NYC Teaching Fellows. With Banyan, Seth helps schools leverage technology for teacher and student wellness, including with AI literacy PD for teachers and live virtual programs for students. Seth's programs have reached more than 10,000 students on 3 continents and touched the lives of teachers globally. He is a frequent presenter at elite EdTech conferences and the host of 2 podcasts, Make It Mindful, an education podcast, and Why Distance Learning. Seth, welcome to Transformative Principal. Excited to have you here.
Jethro, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great to be here.
Yes, and these 2 shows are 2 of the newest shows on the B Podcast Network, which we are so grateful to have your collaboration with and grateful to have you there as part of it. Why don't you start out by telling us what Banyan Global Learning is and how the podcasts fit so nicely into that bigger idea?
Absolutely. So Banyan Global Learning is a company that I founded 15 years ago. I taught abroad at a school in Taipei, Taiwan, and they really liked me. They wanted me to stay. And I had ties back in the US. And so I pitched them this idea to continue teaching for them, but using this newfangled technology called video conferencing. At the time I was living in New York, teaching in New York, I had to drive out to Long Island in order to get access to the codec machine that I needed in order to be able to pull off a video conferencing call, which is kind of nuts to think about. And in the beginning, it was me, a camera, and 42 fifth graders in Taiwan. And we were all just kind of co-creating and figuring it out together. That program grew, and we now have an English as a foreign language program that we facilitate for a network of schools in Asia that is taught on site in K through 4 and over distance learning in 5 through 8. It's based in language, culture, and technology. Those are the 3 content areas that we cover. And about 5 years ago, we were at the point where we're like, okay, we've got this network of schools. We'd like to continue to grow as a company. We think we're doing great work. We don't have any boots on the ground, actual boots on the ground in Asia. So let's look domestically. Let's try to split off the most popular part of our distance learning program, which was our live virtual field trips. And let's do those with schools in the US and Canada. That was in January of 2020. So like, 2 months before the world ended. And then when that happened, initially what I did is I responded to the needs of my daughter, and she was in 1st grade and she was suddenly isolated from her peers. And I knew how to use Zoom. Nobody else did. So I started with some social calls with her and her friends, and those evolved into like social calls for her class and then for her school. That evolved into our social and emotional learning program. One of the great things about distance learning is that you have access to things that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so with the Global Citizenship Program abroad, it's bringing American teachers, American curriculum into the classroom in a way that wouldn't be possible with on-site teachers who are embedded in the culture over there. But at the beginning of the pandemic, SEL was something that was not available everywhere. And so to be able to provide it, they had to lean on other providers coming in via distance, which is how everyone was teaching at the time. Wow. And so we started doing that. And that also evolved into a digital citizenship program, which we basically see as SEL for the internet. It was a natural fit with a lot of the things that we'd been doing. We'd been practicing digital citizenship skills with our students in Asia for the decade before that. And so it was a natural fit for us to really identify what those skills were and then teach them via live virtual program. All of this is a way to leverage technology to benefit not just the academics of students, but also their well-being, their character development. And we, falling into that same realm of leveraging technology for good, we believe that AI has the potential to really improve the well-being of both teachers and students. And you got to be careful about it, the way that you approach it, and we're very explicit about that in our trainings. But we like the idea of developing a personal relationship with AI that's based on a mindset of curiosity and skepticism to find out how it can help you specifically grow. And in that way, it all kind of fits under that umbrella of mindful adoption of technology, which is what Make It Mindful is about. We try to take a step back, look at education through a mindfulness lens, which really is just about like getting a degree of objectivity when it comes to these things that as teachers we just do over and over and over again because we were told to do them, or because they were things that we were taught how to do decades ago, or we were taught to do decades ago. And we want to just be able to take that step back and look at things more objectively. And that's what Make It Mindful is about. I've got some really amazing guests that I've had on there that think really have really unique perspectives when it comes to education and especially technology. And then why distance learning obviously fits right into that. It was frustrating going through the pandemic, because at the beginning of the pandemic we were like, well, sorry, it's frustrating for a lot of reasons, but but the beginning of the pandemic we were like, oh my gosh, the entire world all of a sudden is doing what we've been doing for 10 years now. Like, the biggest obstacle to having people engage with live virtual learning experiences at that point was the fact that teachers didn't know how to use Zoom, right? Like that was like the biggest obstacle. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, that obstacle's gone. The sky's the limit, right? But what happened, I think, was really a gigantic like systemic failure, where everybody was just viewing distance learning as like a triage, where it was like any given day was potentially going to be the last day that they were going to do it. So why would they even care about
Yeah,
getting better at it?
totally.
And so we we watched this happen, and we're like, yo, we have the answer.
Yeah.
like we know how to do this well. Like, but people understandably were stuck in their own experiences. They were just trying to get through the day. And so a lot of people had really bad experiences with distance learning. And even if they didn't have bad experiences with distance learning, they associate distance learning with a bad time.
Yeah.
And so why distance learning is about debunking a lot of those attitudes that were established during that time, and really illuminating for people what is possible using that medium.
Oh,
And I collaborate with a couple of people from the Center for Interactive Learning and Collaboration, which is like a marketplace for live virtual field trips. They're fantastic. And we're just, we're speaking that story one episode at a time.
well, and what's so fascinating is I experienced something like this also, where I was at,
Huh.
so in 2009, my first district level position was a distance learning and media technology team lead. And so I was in charge of distance learning for our school district, the whole district, 42 schools. And one of my jobs was to ensure that students were learning effectively in the sign language and Chinese classes, where we had one teacher teaching multiple students in different places. And like you, we had to have special software and hardware to be able to make this happen. But what that enabled us to do then was also connect with Tony Blair's Faith Foundation and have our students talk with
Hmm.
other students across the world in India and other places that our students just in the middle of Utah just never had a chance to connect with anyone. And so then later I also knew how to use Zoom because I was using it to coach principals years before the pandemic, because I was in Alaska and like I couldn't fly down to the lower 48 all the time. And so I just coached principals virtually, and I still coach principals
Hmm.
virtually. And I had the same thing happen where it was like all of a sudden everybody needs coaching, everybody needs support. I know exactly how to do it virtually. And people also were like, all of a sudden hate doing that because they associate it with this bad experience that they had. And it's so frustrating to be in that situation where it's like, no, this can actually be really good. In fact, one of my clients, I she's in international school right now. I've never met her in person, and she's been a client of mine since 2016. And we're
Hmm.
we're almost a decade working together and never having met in person. And I just find that amazing. We have a great relationship, and it's wonderful. And it's so cool that we can do that without having ever met in person. And I know when we do meet in person, because this happens all the time, we just pick up, and it can be totally natural if you set things up correctly to begin with. And like the pandemic may be in the rearview mirror. That doesn't mean that we have to ditch the things that could be successful.
Yeah.
So, all right, I want to go back to this idea about AI and
Well,
curiosity.
can I add
Please
something
go ahead.
just for one second though? Just because your point about like having people you haven't met, I haven't met in person either of the co-hosts of my Why Distance Learning
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm meeting them in person at ISTE next week,
Oh,
and for the first time, and we're actually going to be presenting, and we're doing a live podcast recording at ISTE that will come out as one of our episodes at the Denver Museum of Arts and Sciences, which would be awesome.
oh.
But yeah, AI, curiosity, skepticism, you need them both. What's your question?
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because here's where I'm coming from with this. One of my guests coming up in just a little bit is going to be Kevin Schindel, and we talked last year about how AI is just not there yet, and the reality is it's not quite there yet. But if we don't start using it and start understanding how to make it work, I fear that if we don't use it, then we're not going to, one, ever know what it looks like when it does arrive, or two, we're not going to be prepared for when it does arrive. And so I like this idea of curiosity and skepticism. One of the things I've been telling people all the time is it's really easy to get AI to do anything you want, but it's really difficult to get it to do the exact thing you want. Because if you just want to do a demo and say, hey, do this thing, and it doesn't matter, that's great. But if you're like, this is really important, I really need to make it good, you have to go through several iterations before it's at the level that you would be comfortable with. And if you think you can do it on the first draft, you don't even know what you're talking about well enough to say this is what it should be, right? So talk more about the curiosity and skepticism piece.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about makes me think of this spectrum that I envision when it comes to the utility of AI for any given task, and it has to do with how much experience and knowledge that person has in regards to that task. You know, you said AI hasn't really arrived yet. I would say I would ask for what exactly, right? Because it's a Swiss Army knife that has an infinite number of knives, right? Like it could do so many things for so many people. But if you look at this spectrum, like on this side of the spectrum, you have people who have no content area knowledge, right? And they're coming in and they're asking it a question, and they do not have the foundational knowledge or skills to understand whether or not that output is actually good. And so their skepticism is not founded in anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then on the other side, you have people whose knowledge is so deep that they couldn't possibly write a good enough prompt that was going to allow them to get an output of the same quality that they could get by just writing it themselves.
Yeah.
Right. But then you have this enormous middle area where you have people who have a certain amount of understanding, a certain amount of skills, and the technology can be used to augment those skills. And so you've got the curiosity to wonder whether or not it can actually help you, but you've got the skepticism to know whether or not it is helping you.
Yeah, let me
You know.
illustrate that real quick, because I had a very good experience with this. So, if I wanted AI to write a book for a school principal based on the 500 plus podcasts I've done on this podcast, it could do that, but I don't think it would be as good as what I could create just by writing it, which is what my book, How to Be a Transformative Principal, is. And I went through a lot of work to refine that and get it to where it needed to be and make it what I think is a really good book. So here's what I did. I had some presentations I gave down in Arizona, and I did something different in preparing for these presentations than I've done before. The goal was to have them be part of my book, How to Be a Transformative Principal, essentially a chapter from my book. And here's what I did. I put the book into ChatGPT and I said, make a 25-minute presentation out of this, because I know that I can talk. And so I was like, don't make a 50-minute presentation, make a short one. And I just want you to put the slide titles and the speaker notes in there, and and basically just take this from my book, and because I've already done the work to make it organized nicely, to make it look good, and to make the flow right. And I had it just create that outline of the talk for me. And then I went through what it gave and read through it all and said, okay, this is pretty good. And here's the place where it totally fell down and it was just terrible. All the slide titles were all the most boring, most plain, most generic parts of my book. There was nothing like, if you look at it, you're like, okay, that's a total waste. That is basically nothing. It's slop, as Scott Wilkinson says, is it's nothing. And Simon Wilkinson, excuse me. Maybe that name's not even right. I don't remember. But anyway, somebody calls it slop, which I love. It's just pathetic, lame, no good AI stuff that's generated that is, just a waste. So it created this slop. So I went through and I changed all the slide titles to be something that was on point, that helped me tell the story and communicated clearly. And then the speaker notes for each slide had the stories and the examples and the things from my book, again, told in a really poor way compared to how I wrote it, and certainly compared to how I would talk about it. But here's the thing, that doing that thing helped me get clear on what I needed to actually say, reminded me of the stories and the examples, and then made it so that I could deliver what I think are my best presentations that I've ever done. And that is where I was skeptical that it could actually do a good job. I was curious about how it could help me. And I delivered a great product in my presentations from how it helped me, and did it in a much faster amount of time. I already wrote the book. Like, I'm not plagiarizing or cheating or anything like that. What I'm doing is I'm using it to help me be at my best self. What's your response to that, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, what I love about that story is that it's dripping with examples of you,
Yes.
right? Like this is your personal journey with this technology. And what our trainings look to do is to get people to the point where they feel empowered to have that journey on their own. Because this is not about like, here's how you use this tech. It's about what do you do on any given day? And can you experiment with the tech to see if it can help you or not? Right? Like it's about getting to know what its capabilities are as an augment to you personally. And so in this situation, you had that you already had the content, right? The hundreds of pages of content that you could put in there. That's a really great way to train a large
Yeah.
language model, right? Like here's 300 pages of my words. That's a great, if you have that resource, like that's a great way to do that, right? But you also identified like it's really bad at generating these slide titles. That totally makes sense because you're looking for something unique, and all it's doing is coming from the internet. Like it's by definition generic, right?
Yeah.
But it's great at like picking out those examples. You talked about the slide notes, right? Like give it like the transcript from all 30 of my episodes and give me like an example of where people talked about, like we asked the question, why distance learning? Because I've thought about doing this exact same thing, right? Like I've got, now 35 transcripts from podcast episodes. I think we've got a book in there or
You
two
totally
or
do.
three.
Yep.
And so I've thought like, man, I like, could I just have ChatGPT write the book for me? And what I thought I would do, first of all, we ask everyone the question, why distance learning?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has an answer to that. And like, it's these amazing moments of people at the end of the episode distilling their experience with this medium into like this statement of purpose that is just awesome. It comes off well every time, and it's the title of the podcast, so it's great.
Bonus.
And we also ask for these golden moments, these moments when the technology just absolutely accomplished exactly what they dreamed it could, or maybe beyond that. And if you were to if I could, like, I would put all 35 transcripts in and I would be like, pull out the answers to why distance learning, go, right? And then I would be like, okay, identify some themes within these answers. Okay, now organize those into the chapters of a book. Like, what would that look like as like the content of a book? Okay, now let's look at the first chapter here. Like, if I'm planning on covering like this, and this, I have this clear picture of what I want to cover, and I'm expressing that to you. Now write the introduction for that, right? And so there's a couple of things that I'm doing here. One, I'm feeding it a lot of information that is specific to me and allows it to understand exactly where I'm coming from and what I want. I'm breaking the task down into these different parts so that I can catch it. Like, I'm not just plugging that all in there and saying, write a book for me, right? Like I'm trying to like have it be a co-creator with me in this process so that I can get to the point where I can actually say, write the book for me. Right. But up until then, I've got to, you got to hold its hand along the way, or else it's going to go off into some realm that it doesn't understand because it doesn't know your context.
Yep.
And so it's about this conversation that you have with it. Now, most people who are using this are not necessarily using it to write a book, but they do have tasks that they do on any given day. Any given teacher has tasks that they do on any given day. And you can kind of put the tasks into that matrix where it's like, what are you good at and what do you enjoy doing, right?
Yeah.
And the things that you're not good at and you don't enjoy doing but you still have to do them all the time, I'd start there. And maybe see if like you can experiment with AI and see if it can help you do those things. But you're basically like, I think a good approach to understanding whether or not this technology can work for you is to like identify your tasks, cross-reference it with what AI to be good at or not good at, and then start experimenting. Be like, oh, this thing right here where I'm doing like some work and where it's required, like summarization is required, like that's something that AI could probably help me out at. Let me try it and let me just be discerning and understand if it is helping me, and let me experiment a little bit and see if I can get a better result if I give it more context. Oh, looks, that didn't really work. Maybe this isn't good. Maybe this is something that I want to own myself, but let me see about this thing over here. Right. And it's just about that active experimentation. And it would be shocking for me to learn of people who went through that process and didn't find something that they at very least would replace Google with AI.
Oh my gosh, yes, especially replacing Google. I won't go on my whole rant about how much I hate Google search results and how they are just completely and totally a waste. The I will just say the Arc search browser, if you can get that as the app on your phone, if you need to look up anything that you would typically Google for in the past, oh my gosh, this app is phenomenal because it tells you exactly what you need to know, and just it's so much better than Google is now. So one of the things you said that I want to just go back and highlight because I think it's so important is no matter what we're doing, all learning is personal. And you,
Hmm.
when you talked, you were in your discussion there, you were talking about going through this personal like process of using AI to help you with your book and taking your 35 episodes from Why Distance Learning and putting them into some sort of book. Like the power that comes from that is you learning those things yourself and sharing that story of what you learned and how you learned it and why it was important and what other people need to know from it. People can read your book and they will get something different out of it than you intended. They'll get something different out of it than the person next to them, than 10 other people who read it. And the same goes for all these podcasts that we do and everything also. And when it comes down to it, the things that we do are so personal to us that to think that we can like design a learning experience where everybody's going to get the same thing out of it is kind of crazy. And yet that's what we try to do in education. And,
Hmm.
we can continue to do that. That's fine. But if we instead started with the idea that everything is personal to you and you have to make the decision about what is valuable and what's not and how that works and whether or not you're going to remember this and pay attention to it in the future, like you could have just replaced everything that we said about AI and just put in any other tool, any other content area, any other learning that they could do, approach it with curiosity and skepticism. And I think that that's an
Mm-hmm.
incredibly powerful way to focus on learning as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that highlights another potential benefit of AI to bring it back to AI is that like I don't know if you've seen these prompts that like essentially turn ChatGPT into learning software,
Uh-huh.
where it's like, these are the steps that you're like writing to the chatbot, like these are the steps that you're going to go through, and you're going to ask this person for all of these different things, and along the way here's what you're going to do. Once you get their answer for this, then you're going to do this. Once you get your answer for this, then you're going to do this. And it essentially turns like any teacher with some basic prompt engineering skills into a coder, right? To be able to like create personalized learning software, which has been a boon for education, right? Like differentiation traditionally was one of the hardest things that teachers had to do. To be able to look at a classroom of 30 kids, know that they were all in different places, and think, I have a limited amount of time up in front of these kids to deliver information that's going to resonate with each one of them in some way, but all of them in different ways, and for some of them, no, no resonation at all, right? Being able to use personalized learning software has been, again, a boon for a teacher to be able to reach each and every kid with what they need at that time. And in this way, like, AI in education is not new, right? Like, we've been using this stuff for like a decade. But what you have now is that you're not dependent on the companies and what's available, what the products are that are available, because you yourself can make personalized learning software for your kids using prompt engineering. And I think that that's one of the great benefits of AI that speaks to that point that you're making about personalized learning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Well, we can talk more, and we're going to talk at ISTE when we get there. That'll be fun. The podcasts are Make It Mindful and Why Distance Learning. And I've got a link to both of those in the show notes. But my last question, Seth, is what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader like you?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think about digital citizenship, um, and feel that when I talk about digital citizenship, it's one of those things that like people sort of have this inherent understanding of how important it is, but for one reason or another, it just gets dropped by the wayside. People don't really teach it. And part of it is this obsession with reading and math scores. Part of it is that it's a really tricky gray area where there's not a lot of right and wrong. And really, it's just one big long discussion where it's more about bringing intention to what you're doing than it is about following some prescribed set of behaviors that are the right way to do it. There are some of those for sure, but that conversation, that objectivity, that ability to take a step back and look at yourself and your behavior and ask yourself why you're doing that thing, to be able to enable students to do that with technology, I think is one of the great responsibilities that we have as adults. And I think that one of the critical parts of that people absolutely overlook is our own digital citizenship as adults. And the fact that, I think it's high school sophomores right now are the first people whose parents have always had a smartphone in their hand,
Mm.
right? And so this is a generation of kids that's distracted by screens, that's being raised by adults who are distracted by screens. And in addition to acknowledging how important digital citizenship is and making that an integral part of your approach with your school community, I think that each and every one of us as adults has the responsibility of taking a hard look at our own digital citizenship and understanding the decisions that we make and why we make them as a jumping off point to being able to have that conversation and model good citizenship for our young learners. So that's kind of a two-pronged approach. One is to just, make it important, give it its space, but the other is to think about your own behavior and model that.
Yeah, man, that is awesome. Thank you. I agree. I don't have anything to add there. Once again, Make It Mindful and Why Distance Learning. Go check those out wherever you listen to podcasts. Great stuff. Seth, thank you so much for being part of Transformative Principal today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Jethro. I feel like I talked a lot about the Why Distance Learning podcast. Make it mindful. A lot of the things that I mentioned here are weaved in there, like a lot of the discussions on AI, a lot of those discussions about digital citizenship. I've had some amazing guests on both podcasts, but Justin Reich I had on Make It Mindful. He's kind of a bigwig at MIT. I found that too, that like you just like kind of reach and ask people, like oftentimes they'll come on, which is great.
Yeah.
Another one of my favorite episodes is Adriana Galvan. She's the Dean of Students once at UCLA, and I talked to her about like identity and innovation in her role. So yeah, I'd love for people to check these out. I love podcasting. I love just being here talking to you. I love the curiosity that's inherent to it, the flow, the questioning, the authenticity. It's been a really, really fun outlet for me. So I hope listeners hear my passion and know that passion is a part of each episode that I put out.
Yeah, very good. Thank you again, man. This was awesome. Appreciate it.